to this session. We're looking particularly this afternoon at challenges for the African context. And what we're going to be focusing on today, and I hope you're going to find this an interesting discussion, is on something which in many other contexts is actually quite alien. If you come from America, this will be something like, what? But in the African context particularly, and we've seen it in other nations where it's actually come into force, we have a real challenge on our hands in the form of state regulation of religion. Now, as I'm sure you'll be aware, and we're going to obviously be unpacking in this session, whenever the state starts to intervene and control the religious sector, you no longer have a meaningful right to religious freedom at all. And yet that is something which is unfortunately very prevalent, particularly in the African context. So at the moment in South Africa, we have a process underway where the CRL Rights Commission, which stands for our Cultural, Religious and Linguistic Rights Commission, which is set up to protect religious freedom, is actually instituting a process where they're looking to implement a system for state control of religion, which is obviously the antithesis, we believe, of what they should be doing. But you're having a similar context in Uganda, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and of course it already exists in Namibia. It already exists and is being implemented, a state control of religion mechanism in Rwanda and also in Angola. And you're going to hear some examples as we go. So we hope this is going to be a very interesting discussion for you. And without more ado, I'm going to hand over to our moderator, Asher Maoz.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Although we meet in the ballroom, I can assure you that all the people on stage are serious people, and I know nothing about their dancing abilities, but I know about their research abilities. The marriage of state and religion is an unhappy one, yet the entanglement between both of them seems unavoidable, considering the fact that both of them deal with the same people living on the same piece of land. The relations between both range from the model where state and religion are one and inseparable, as in the state of the Vatican, possibly also Iran, to the laicite model, where the state declares itself secular, prohibited from recognizing any religion. Another classification which brings us closer to our theme is state control or regulation of religious institutions. This phenomenon may take place both in regimes hostile to religion, such as the Soviet Union, and in states where the state is favorable to religions and even supports them. The issue of state control over religious institutions may clash with the concept of freedom of religion or belief entrenched in international law. This freedom applies both to individuals as well as communities. Nevertheless, the state may, even must intervene, for instance, in case where religious activity negates the law, or perhaps even when it collides with public policy. The question is who decides what public policy and what isn't included in that. State intervention beyond this border, I think, is an infringement of the freedom of religion. I've been told, by the way, from childhood that it's God who controls religion. We don't need the state who control it. I will end up here, just a few remarks, procedural. We'll have a first round where people will speak for up to 7 minutes, emphasis on up to. They'll get an alert when it comes close to the 7 minutes. And if it says time over, then just finish your sentence, please. Afterwards, by the way, I just told the lady the other day, I realized that some of the panelists, when she's sitting here, they look away and they don't see her. So they continue talking. It doesn't work. Time won't stop. Afterwards, we'll have a short round of questions from the audience. And again, if I give them 7 minutes, I give each of you 1 minute. Afterwards, we'll have another round where we'll relate to each other, a short one, and maybe try to come up with solutions. Our first speaker is Professor Mark. Yeah, here he is. Just a moment. And I want to introduce the speakers. All of them are known in their own rights. And if you still have any hesitations, you can consult with the program. They appear there. Mark, he will lead us actually into the issue.
Thank you, Asher, and thank you, Michael. Religious communities are notoriously vulnerable to the overreach of secular government, and nowhere is this more evident than in the vast and varied continent of Africa. Freedom of conscience and religion is one of the most vital elements that go to make up the identity of believers, but it has also been said to constitute a precious asset for atheists, agnostics, and the unconcerned. In these preliminary remarks, I intend to make 3 short points, 1 global, 1 national, and 1 local. Dealing with global, much of what I would want to say was more eloquently put this morning by His All Holiness Bartholomew, the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople. But I will look at Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This provides that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. And as its title implies, the document does not invent something new, but is declaratory of the innate rights of humanity. That declaration is augmented by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And it is important to note the legal architecture of Article 18.3. Freedom of religion is absolute. No state authority can restrict what an individual or group believe. However, the freedom to manifest one's religion is qualified, and the limitations are extremely narrowly drawn. First, they must be prescribed by law, and secondly, they must be necessary to protect public safety, order, health, or morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. The burden of proving the legitimacy and therefore the lawfulness of any limitation rests with government. The standard of proof is a demanding one. Necessity is a high bar. But the recent COVID-19 pandemic has had the unintended effect of lowering the bar and diluting the necessity test. Many governments use the cloak of coronavirus to force through some of the most authoritarian peacetime provisions, limiting the free practice of religion. Places of worship were closed, religious gatherings prohibited, and traditional rituals rendered unlawful. Governments leaned into the public health justification, but with little regard for concepts of reasonableness and proportionality. A research exercise into these emergency provisions was presented to the A-Class Conference on Law, Religion, Health and Healing that met in Côte d'Ivoire in 2021. The research exercise concluded convincingly that in the vast majority of countries, the restrictive provisions were ultra-vires and unconstitutional. With some notable exceptions, these draconian provisions were not challenged. Litigation is the pursuit of the wealthy. Most people were more concerned with putting food on the table. And furthermore, due to lockdown, many court buildings were closed and judges were simply not hearing cases. One case which has started is that brought by Jan Figel against the Republic of Slovakia. It concerns anti-COVID measures, including a complete ban on all religious services, which he claimed was an infringement of his right to freedom of religion under the European Convention. I consider Figel's case to be a strong one, and if the Strasbourg court agrees with me, it will create a meaningful restraint on future overreach. But absent such a corrective, the enhanced authoritarianism of government constitutes a major threat to religious liberty. Governments who exercise draconian powers rapidly acquire a taste for it. My second point is national, and in common with most African countries, the Republic of South Africa includes in its constitution the tapestry of human rights provisions articulated in international instruments such as the Universal Declaration. But these rights, of which freedom of religion is a central component, are merely exhortatory. They are valueless unless they can be enforced by citizens. The Republic of South Africa can be justly proud of its constitutional court. Constructed on the site of a former prison where Nelson Mandela was once incarcerated, it stands as a beacon to civil liberties and democratic values. I am proud to have known several of its former justices, Albie Sachs, Tony Madala, and Edwin Cameron. The Constitutional Court has been robust in ensuring that the rights and freedoms embedded in the Constitution have become a lived reality for the citizens of this rainbow nation. But some may question whether it is as effective now as it was in its early years. And as well as national courts, there are regional courts and tribunals, the European Court of Human Rights, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in Costa Rica. But almost invisible is the African Court of Human and People's Rights. Underpowered and underfunded, the court claims to be the judicial arm of the African Union. The vision of the court, it says on its website, is an Africa with a viable human rights culture. I fear it has still some distance to travel, and largely, I suspect, because African governments of all stripes are skeptical of its jurisdiction and disinclined to implement its decisions. This is a good moment for funding a research exercise. And my third and final point is much more local. We can't leave it to the judges to do all the heavy lifting. Our biggest problem concerns religious illiteracy, which is all-pervasive in government, the civil service, in schools and universities, and in the workplace. We no longer understand the doctrines, beliefs, and practices of other religions. Ignorance breeds misunderstandings, and misunderstandings breed discrimination and hatred. We need to speak to each other openly and honestly, and with a spirit of humility and generosity. At a local level, community resolutions are readily achievable. Reasonable accommodations can be made when a spirit of trust and respect prevails. This is what I understand by Ubuntu in action, the theme of our conference. Individual religious organizations, even large ones, are powerless against governments, particularly those who have acquired an enhanced sense of authoritarianism. But acting together, they can become a force to be reckoned with. I look forward to hearing stories of how there has been a conversion of high-minded theories of freedom of religion into the lived reality of the weak, the impoverished, and the left behind. We need both macro and micro solutions to the challenges that face us. God bless Africa. Nkosi sikelele Africa.
Thank you, Mark. You overpassed your time, but it was worth it. Our next speaker, you heard already, is Michael Swain, He's not only the panelist, he's also the convener of our session. But before he speaks, let me say a word. This session is in honor of Professor Peter Kerzen from the University of Stellenbosch, one of the leading figures in our area. Mark and I were privileged to attend the ACLAR's convention when he was elected first president, and his influence is beyond Africa. It's all over the world. Michael.
Thank you very much. So we've heard how critical religious freedom is, and we've also heard, in another sense, how delicate that freedom is, and how therefore vital it is that we actually actively support it. And when we see erosions of it or encroachments to it, we actually take a stand and we rise up and we make sure that our voices are heard. One of the big challenges, as I've said, is that we face an increasing tendency from states to try to intervene and in some way control the religious sector. We've had this already in South Africa. In 2014 to 2019, the Cyril Rights Commission, chaired by Mrs. Mkhwanazi Kgeluva, did a survey and produced a report which was called The Commercialization of Religion and the Abuse of People's Belief Systems. And what this turned out to be was a very long and detailed document of some of the abuses that were taking place within the religious sector, some of them quite serious. And the recommendation was that in order to control the religious sector, what was necessary was a system of what they call peer review mechanisms, whereby for each faith certain high dignitaries, high officials would be appointed. They in turn would have the capacity to vet everybody else, all the different what they called umbrella organizations or associations or networks or fraternals, to see if they were appropriate and suitable. And then everybody, every church, every religious practitioner, which would have been anybody from a pastor to a worship leader to a cell group leader possibly, would then have to join an approved church, number one, and then they would also then in turn have to be part of an approved umbrella organization with a peer review committee over that. And at the top of that, interestingly enough, was the Cyril Rights Commission, who wanted to be the final arbiter. And we looked at that and we looked at the terms of the Cyril Rights Commission, which is an institution of state, and we immediately drew the conclusion in law that there was no validity for the course of action they were pursuing. And we then informed and mobilized and engaged with all the different faith communities of South Africa, because of course the right to religious freedom is a generic right. It applies to all faiths, equally to all faiths. So what affects one faith equally affects other faiths. And we looked at all the challenges, all the concerns that were raised in this report. And our analysis, and we actually have the young lady here who actually did that analysis, Daniela Ellerbeck, we ascertained that every single one of those was actually covered by existing law. In other words, there were laws in place that quite adequately addressed every single abuse. But the challenge is, of course, that these abuses are sometimes quite inflammatory and they get high media attention. And this is a common pattern, unfortunately, that you get this very serious, sometimes horrifying situation within the religious sector, but that then is used to almost brush the whole religious sector with the same image. And the solution is, if only we had a license, if only we could license everybody and register everybody, then these issues wouldn't emerge. Well, that, of course, is simply not true. So we looked at the situations, and the first conclusion we reached is that state regulation in that instance is unnecessary. It's unnecessary. Why? Because there were existing laws that are in place to deal with everything. We had some high-level cases, by the way. There was a man, if you were familiar with the South African situation, called the Prophet of Doom. Doom is an insecticide. And he was spraying insecticide in the faces of congregants and claiming somehow that this was going to heal them. God had showed him. Well, very importantly, there is not and never will be and never has been a defense to committing any criminal act by saying God told me to do it. Religious freedom is not a defense to a criminal act. And sure enough, he was indicted on 5 counts of assault. He was sentenced to a suspended jail sentence and to fines. So it's unnecessary. You have existing laws in place. Obviously, it's unconstitutional, because as soon as somebody can be empowered to decide whether or not what you want to teach or preach or say or believe or express is somehow unacceptable, that is a fundamental erosion of your right to religious freedom. Never mind your right to association. You should never, and you can never, be forced to associate, because your freedom of association is obviously equally your freedom not to associate. And unworkable. How do you actually decide who is or is not a religious organization? In the Christian sense, for example, Jesus said, where 2 or more of you agreed together, I'm in your midst. Is that a church? How do you decide what is or is not a religious organization or a religious gathering? When does the state then step in? And what are the consequences for you if you say, I'm not happy with that decision? Are you fined? Are you jailed? This is where state regulation becomes so potentially erosive and invasive. And of course, the affordability aspect is a very key thing. Where do you find the money to register what might be in South Africa, for example, 100,000 religious organizations and maybe 500,000 people who might qualify as a religious practitioner? That's a massive task. And what makes you think, if you've actually imposed this system and given everybody licenses and vetted them to make sure that they're suitable, that that's actually going to solve your problem? And if they do then commit a crime, what will you then do? Well, you still have to go back to exactly the same laws that are in place anyway. So putting another layer of regulation or laws over it, when for whatever reason, whether through simply not having the capacity to it or maybe even the will to do it, you're not willing to enforce existing laws, what makes you think that by putting another layer of law over that, you're going to solve the problem? You're not. And the big danger is this. Religious freedom is also absolutely vital in a democracy, because religious organizations are one of the very few institutions or entities in a society that have the ability to put out with authority a narrative, a message, a position that might well be contrary to that of the government. And if the government can then control that narrative by giving you a license or taking that license away, then you have a very serious erosion of democracy, because it is often the faith communities that are the moral compass of the nation and that actually can speak truth to power. So these are the good reasons why we believe, and the organization I represent is called Freedom of Religion South Africa, we do not and must not have any system of state regulation either in South Africa or, frankly, anywhere else, because as soon as you get the state involved at that measure, that is the death of your right to religious freedom in any meaningful sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Our next speaker is Pastor Giet Khosa, who told me that pastor is not part of his name, but just his position.
I'm here.
Giet, please.
I'm here on your left.
You are here.
Thank you.
Close to me.
That was good. Good afternoon. I think it's an afternoon, leaders, pastors. It's really a great opportunity to be not standing, sitting here. Pastors are always standing with the leaders. I was saying to them earlier on when we were preparing that after this I'm going back to school, because everyone is a professor or a doctor or an executive director. I said, hey, yeah.
I told you are closer to God than all of us.
So I've been asked to speak also on the South African context of this religious freedom. So I'm going to be very practical with you, giving practical examples, the importance, obviously, of freedom of religion and the relationship between the state and religion. When I was about 14 years old, I started working with the elders. So I've been in this space since Actually, I was part of when President Mbeki was still there, formation of the Interfaith Council of South Africa. Together with Prof, we launched another organization which was more interfaith. So I've been in the mix, you know, like Stu, we've been in the mix. So I have a lot of practical and having to see and experience what works, what doesn't work for the religious communities. But let me start off by saying, South Africa was a blessed nation, even with our challenges and issues that confront us currently, you know, crime and all of that. But when it comes to the human rights issues, I think we excel on that, you know. And there are safeguards in our constitution and other Chapter 9 institutes to safeguard all this. And I'm going to compliment Michael, what he was saying. So if you look really at our constitution, I'm not a lawyer, but I understand the Bill of Rights. It really covers us in the sense of covering us, our protection, our freedom of expression, our freedom of association. And not only that, the writers of our constitution, which one of them is sitting here, really had the wisdom to look ahead, that in the framework of the constitution itself, then you find the Chapter 9 institutions that are focused to the things that need to be protected in the democracy. One of them is the Central Commission that Mike was talking about. And its mandate really is to protect, is to educate, is to make sure that each person's rights are protected and it's practiced. And if you are like me, grew up in Alexander, one of the townships in Johannesburg, you will understand that that Chapter 9 institution were referring because there were certain religions, practices that were demonized back in the day. And so everybody's religion needed to be accommodated and be protected. That's where it came from. That everybody need to understand that not everybody is a devil. Not everybody is a demon. They genuinely believe in this and they must be respected. So that's what the mandate of that came from. And then you have the Human Rights Commission in case, and this is paraphrasing, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, so lawyers will correct me. Then you have a Human Rights Commission, a whole commission to make sure that our rights are protected. And if that's not work, then we have a judiciary that if that does not work, so in a sense, we really got a safeguard making sure. And then if we zero into these practices where we did find that the commission, not only the state where was interfering with the COVID-19 in a sense where we've been grounded, Mark referred to it in a big way. But you have the organization like Khosa who are always laser focused to say these rights must be protected. So in the South African context, that even when the state will try, the state will always fail because of the safeguard. But what is good that as religious people, we always has to be on guard of whenever we see something that look like, I always said when I preach, anything that look like a
Great commandments. That means putting God in the center of everything that we do, in the center of who we are and what we become. And second is that religious freedom fosters the expressions of beliefs and hope and peace and unity in our society. And then it's so important for us to join our efforts and work together so we can speak about our convictions freely without any pressure. And then third, religious freedom inspires people to help each other, to work together. You know, can you imagine how our societies will be if each of us just focus on himself, forgetting that we have to love each other, serve each other, and work with each other? Where our societies will be? We need to ask ourselves these questions. And fourth, religious freedom acts as unifying and relying forces for shaping values and morality. So that's why it's so important for us as we talk about these questions to ask ourselves, if religion is not there to help with shaping character and mediating hard times, who will be? If religion is not there to teach honesty, integrity, love, unity, who will be? If religion is not there to preach charity and kindness and forgiveness, who will be? If religion is not there to uplift the feeble knees and to minister and help others that needs our help, who will be? And the answer is, we will be. So it's important then for us to be together and work on this together, my beloved brothers and sisters. What we are seeing in several countries in Africa now is concerning, and my brethren have really largely talked about it. I've been, as you know, I'm an African, and I'm happy to be. But particularly, I'm a disciple of Jesus Christ and servant of the Lord. So I'm so grateful to strive daily to love my brothers as myself. And I'm trying to live, I know it's the case for all of us, to live the golden rule, right? It's so important that we do for others what we want others to do for us. And that's the key. But as you know, I think almost a year or two ago in Kenya, 400 people died. They were part of these cult groups, and then they were invited to fast for many days. And what led, because they were told that by fasting for a month or two, they will meet Jesus. And then many of them lost their lives. And that's when the government stepped in Kenya particularly, because they consider this act as related to religions and beliefs. But as you said, Michael, this does not have anything to do with religion. This was an act of, it was a crime, and then should be treated as it is. But that was not the case, and the government tried to regulate how religion should operate and function in the country. I'm so grateful to the Kenyan religious leaders for standing together and saying, this is not the time. We don't want to change our laws because of one person misbehaving or leading people to death. We need to consider the impact globally, how this will change and shape our lives. And they stood all together to say, we don't want to see these changes in our constitutions or in our laws. But as you know, not all the countries behave the same or are led the same way. So some countries are trying to protect the religious freedoms, but others are taking this as an opportunity. They're trying to take advantage by putting regulation that restrict religious freedoms. And then today, as you know, you have some countries where churches are closed, for instance. People don't worship. They don't have a place to worship. Why? Because these religions, some small ones that cannot meet the requirements, and then this becomes a serious concern, not only for these countries, but in Africa in general, where people are just constrained and are not free to live and to act according to their beliefs. So I think it's a great topic that we have to counsel about together today, and I pray that we'll all become champions of religious freedoms after this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Elder Thierry. I must admit, I have said it already, I feel somewhat strange to refer to such a young man with the title elder, although he gained it by right. I would like to just emphasize 2 points that you made rightly. Liberal regimes accord the right of belief, but the right of practice is as important, if not more than that. By the way, you have regimes, Soviet Union, whatever, that didn't admit even the right to believe. The second point, which is important to our discussion, is that the freedom of religion doesn't belong to the individuals only, but to community. And that's the point where the state, and I understand in Africa especially, tries to track down on it. It's the freedom of a community, not the freedom of each individual. By the way, I come from the Jewish religion. Without 10 people, unfortunately only men in the Orthodox tradition, we can't even pray, fulfill the prayers. So certainly the freedom belongs to the community, to the 10 people. Okay, thank you. The next speaker is certainly not on the list. It's not my mistake. The surname is there, Pretorius, but the first name is Jan, and maybe you'll explain how come that it's the same surname.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the moderators and to the fellow panelists and colleagues. My name is Jan Pretorius, that's correct, and I am just replacing the founder of SACOF, Pastor Bert Pretorius, just to, from our perspective of freedom of religion, just also give a practical experience of how truly in the last couple of years we've seen the positive impact of how we can bring a solution between faith-based organizations. And it's an honor to be part of this discussion and hearing all of the experiences. We, as Pastor Giet has said, we in South Africa are truly blessed with all the safeguards that have been put into our constitution, and it is not everywhere the same, because the right to freedom of religion is central to our dignity as human beings, and it ties to stability and peace. And for Africa, that's really what we need, is that religion is not used and weaponized, but it brings the peace and stability and the social cohesion that we do need. So in Africa, we've seen, as I said, we have these challenges, as we've seen in Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Uganda, where it is truly for which other reason they would want to. We see these challenges, but we see that there's a recurring trend of state-driven attempts to control and over-regulate this sector. Even in South Africa, as we've heard, we are facing also for the second time the same. And so even Botswana have already looked at regulatory frameworks. So from our perspective, SACOF is a body that has various religious groups, 226 member bodies that represents close to 20,000 faith-based organizations. And with SACOF also working together with the Muslim and the Jewish and also all other faiths community, working together and promoting freedom of religion, because as our elder has said, Ubuntu is not just the freedom for us, it's the freedom for everyone. Because as soon as we have the right to freedom of religion, it is so for every single one of us. And we've seen a different and a constructive path forward. SACOF, in the growth that we've seen, is that churches and faith communities have chosen by themselves to become more accountable. They have chosen by themselves, not through imposed state control, but by voluntary joining structures that align with values and belief and ethical frameworks, seen the growth of self-association. And we've seen this positive shift. We've seen this positive shift over the past several years. Since we've seen this push for state regulation, we've seen an acceleration in voluntary solutions, church ministries, faith-based organizations. We in itself, in our body, are helping and capacitating these smaller bodies and churches to get their affairs in order. It might be administrative, it might be financial, and a lot of it has got to do with capacity, a lot of it has got to do with skills, and building stronger safeguarding policies, improving financial accountability. And we've done this already without the government's compulsion. And why does this matter? Because history teaches us that freedom of religion is not simply the right to worship, but it's also the right to organize and to serve communities and to speak moral truth into public life. independent of public control. So the churches and the faith-based organizations have the capacity, and we have shown that we have the will to self-regulate, and through collaborative platforms like SACOF, like IFCC as well, many of the Muslim communities, UXA, they have their groups, the Jewish Board of Deputies, they have their groups where they regulate their own groups, and when there are, as Professor Hill said, that the two main things that we have to look at is that in your freedom of religion, are you breaking the law, number one, and secondly, are you infringing on somebody else's rights? That is basically what we have to just consider when we allow these concerns to be addressed. So we do not reject accountability. I don't think as the faith bodies we reject accountability. It's not something that we would want to shy away from. On the contrary, we welcome it. But the accountability must come from within the faith communities. It must be shaped by our own beliefs. It must be shaped by our own traditions, and it must be shaped by our own values. And this is why SACOF and other bodies have, across our country and the continent, have really started growing. We are building eternal capacity. We are building peer accountability and collective representation, so that governments can engage then with these bodies. This is meaningful dialogue needs to be had between the government and these bodies so that we can robustly debate, agree and disagree on the things that we need to address. If there are things that concern the government, they will have to come and address it with these bodies without feeling the need to regulate and to legislate. And to close off, and just to affirm very strongly again from our point of view from SACOF, is there's no need for intrusive state regulation of religion when the faith sector in itself is willing and able to do so. And there is a will to do this, and there's a track record already shown by these bodies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Our last speaker is Professor Rassie Malherbe. Last but not least is usually a slogan, but not in this case. As a matter of fact, I've been instructed by Michael to make an exception, and he's the only speaker that is allocated full 10 minutes.
We'll see whether that was a wise decision. Thank you very much, Asher. Thank you for the honor. Thank you to the audience. Thank you for attending. It's an honor for me to be here. Well, I think after listening to all the speakers, I think I can just put the full stop. You said it all. And maybe to be as practical as Jan also have been now. In 2008, we thought, we're a democracy. For the first time since 1994, we have a written constitution, entrenched, and in the constitution it says we have the right to freedom of religion and belief. And even up to 2008, there were a few court cases sort of explaining what that means, but we didn't really know what freedom of religion really entails. What is the scope of freedom of religion and belief? There were international instruments, there were court cases locally, there were, well, what academics wrote. And we thought we should sit down and we should really spell out what religious freedom really means. And we came up and we consulted very widely with churches and everybody else. And we came up with a South African Charter of Religious Rights and Freedoms. And we had a signing ceremony in 2010. And there is the original. bound by Professor Kurtzen himself, with all the signatures and all the correspondence after that of people endorsing afterwards. So that we came to a point where we said we have the support of about 20 million South Africans via their representatives in religious institutions and other institutions. Spelling out in more detail, we heard some of it here, but in much more detail, what do we really understand under the freedom of religion and belief? And I think it's a valuable document. I don't know of any other document of this nature anywhere else. So please, afterwards, have a look. Then in 2016 to 2018, this proposal came up of a law regulating religion. And immediately we said, whoa, wait a minute, for all the reasons that you heard, can we come up with a counter-proposal? And we said, what about a voluntary code of conduct to which religious institutions and clergy and everybody involved in a religion can commit themselves? Say, this is how I am going to conduct myself. We never argued that freedom of religion and belief is an absolute right. There is no such thing as an absolute right. The moment I say I have the freedom of speech, my friend here also has that right. The moment I have the right, I must respect his right, as I expect from him to respect my right. So the moment we say we have rights, we also have responsibilities. So we were very much prepared to say, okay, if the Charter contains the rights around religious freedom, why can't we come up with something like a code of conduct in which we spell out our responsibilities? The idea was not as popular as the rights side of it, but eventually we started in the same way. We consulted widely. We started to draft. We submitted it to the commission, the CRL commission, and we said, let's cooperate on this. Let's develop this. We still had only the framework of it. And eventually we went ahead and we developed it fully. And it's all about what Jan spoke about. Respecting the rights of others, respecting the rights of your members of your church, respecting the fact that we live in a broader society. We're not islands in ourselves. We live in a broader society. We have responsibilities towards society. Things like organizational things, administrative things, financial, sound, healthy financial practices. That's all included in that code of conduct. And we again, we consulted, we sent it out. Many institutions came back to us with comments and so on, and we refined it. And eventually, there we have it. And you're welcome to take copies afterwards. We have the charter and the code of conduct there in one document, because we see it as two sides of the same coin, as it were. And that is really what I strongly believe. These days, I represent the Council for Religious Rights and Freedoms, because my good friend, Professor Peter Kurtzen, has fallen ill and he is not available anymore. This is, and thank you for that, Usher, that it's a little tribute to him as well. There's a picture of him. There it is. It's available to anybody and any institution. Take it, run with it. You can say, you know, we recognize it comes from that council, but it's now ours. We take ownership of it and we run with it. It is drafted in a neutral way. It is not, you cannot link it to a specific religion or faith or whatever. It's for everybody, and I think it's also internationally, shall I say, marketable. So please, Uganda and Kenya and all of those, take it and run with it. Because I truly believe that that is the answer of religion, from whatever religion you may be, to state regulation. I think what we see at work in the time that we live in are two opposing philosophies at work. The one is that of state control of everything, and we know the big mess that government makes when they control everything. We've seen it all through history. And on the other side, that society is much more complicated than that. Society consists of different spheres, each with their distinctive role. And that is true democracy, and that is true freedom. And we believe that we should stand up for that, because that is also the South African basis of the South African Constitution. True freedom, true democracy. So religious freedom fits into that. And nobody is denying that there is malpractices taking place, but that is true of every sphere of society. That there are always people abusing their positions and their situations and committing stuff that the state then has to act upon. And that is why we have the extensive system of criminal law in our country, for example, that can deal with that. But you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. You don't abolish religious freedom as one of the highest values in our Constitution for the sake of what a few criminals do when they have the opportunity. So that is our contribution to religious freedom. That is our contribution to self-regulation. Jan used that word. And I want to challenge the CRL Commission. I want to challenge them. Take it and set up educational opportunities.
That's right.
The Commission, I think, is incredibly well suited to go all over the country and do training in collaboration with Sakov and everybody else, to do training for pastors, for leaders in churches around these things of respect for human rights, respect for society in general around you. What does it mean to be a good citizen? Sound financial practices, good administration. I think the Commission has a wonderful opportunity to do that. As a matter of fact, it is in the Commission's Act, Section 5 of the Act, that they have an educational role. And that, I think, is the way forward, not the way of state regulation. State regulation will only mean one thing: more control by the state and less results, less freedom of religion, less of everything else except state control. You can't have that as a goal in itself. So there you go. Have it.
Thank you, Rassie. Now the action moves to the floor. I have no doubt that each and every one of you would have the qualifications to join us. However, there were not enough seats, so you are sitting on the other side, which means, which I want to say is, please limit your intervention to 1, maximum 2 minutes, if you want answers as well. So, over there. We'll start like this. Here on the bearded guy. What?
Right. Okay. They want to intervene? They want to speak? Okay.
Good day. So my question is, the first is actually two questions. So the first is that generally the response to religious leaders is that we have to show, and the good faith that we come towards society. But if we look at it, the amount that religious leaders and religious organizations do, especially if you take the South African context as an example, the amount that we do for our society, and we compare it to what government does, I think as a collective we do more than what government does for the citizens of this country. But when we engage with the government, the same type of energy that we go with, the good faith that we go with to these type of engagements with the government is generally not reciprocated from the other side. And they don't give us that same type of respect, or that they don't take us seriously when we have these type of engagements. So how do we change that mindset coming from government? And the second is that as the IF20 conference, what is our recommendations going forward to these presidents that will be sitting to show the importance of religious freedom and what we hold, as very valuable and important to us? So how are we going to frame our concerns to them to ensure that they take us seriously and they understand our, the concerns that we have as religious leaders? Thank you very much.
Usually I look to the back of the audience. Are there questions here? Could you come to the first row?
Thank you, Moderator. And my name is Tanya Kekana from King, His Majesty King Mbongo Matlangu, and all protocol observed. Mine is to, when I'm looking at the presentation, especially that of the religious charter, which is informed by the government constitution, because primarily is based, the development is based on what is found in the government constitution. Now my question is, how may the interfaith leadership or organizations influence, influence the different governments in Africa? Because this will also advise the political will to take it serious in terms of their constitution, which will allow a ground for the religious communities to have their freedom in terms of establishment of whatever rules and regulations and policies that can influence their freedom of religion and practice and implementation. How can that be done? Because that will be a primary, because if other governments, they want now to control religious communities, but what is key is that we should take a step forward as the interfaith organization to influence our government, to recognize that our communities have the right to the religious freedom and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Here, over here. Just this gentleman. Oh. Here.
Thank you very much. My name is David Musoma. I was once at the helm of CRL. So I understand the nature of the problem that is confronting our country. When I took over, I applied my mind together with the commissioners. And we defined the terms of our understanding. That religion and belief is intangible. You can't touch. It's like air. You can't touch. And therefore, you can't regulate that which you cannot touch. Basic principle. The second is that the religious actors, if you have to regulate, you can regulate conduct. You regulate conduct. And conduct, its regulation is already available in terms of the law. If I use my influence as a religious actor to abuse a woman in my church under the cloak of religion, I'm not violating the intangible. I'm violating the person, and therefore I'm subject to criminal proceedings. So I think that people who talk about education is very important to make that distinction. Because if you don't do that, you enter into the realm of divinity. How I relate with my God, you have no space to enter there. You can't tell me how I must believe. Which is why that declaration of the rights of belief and religion lies there. You cannot enter that space. You can only enter the space where the conduct is contrary to the belief. So that's how I was able to navigate the complexity of that relationship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have to stop here because of time. We'll start relating, and maybe we should start from the right side, one by one.
And then we'll maybe
Just
take another round of questions after we've answered these three.
If we'll have time, you can speak. You have the right to speak. You don't need my and you can relate to the questions as well as to the other panelists. But please do it in a couple of minutes or so.
The only thing I want to respond to, I think religious institutions in South Africa are too fragmented when it comes to talking to government. So government in the past as well, I experienced it as a young man when the religious leaders went to the government and said, this is how we feel. And the government's response was, do you speak on behalf of everybody? You only speak on behalf of a little group. What does the others say? And I think when it comes to human rights, when it comes to the issue that we have in South Africa of the poor, and we're not doing enough, I believe, honestly, when it comes to things that, and religious freedom then, things that the church and other religions feel strongly about, I'm sorry, they should learn to stand together when they talk to government. That the government can know this is actually representative of the majority of our population. These are the people that we want to vote for us next election. I think that churches and religions in South Africa should stand together much more, and they will be much stronger when they talk to government.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. Of course, we come from different denominations. We have different beliefs. But I think that what unites us is more important than what divides us. It's so critical for us, despite our differences in our beliefs, to know that we have something in common. And that's what unites us, is that God, the same God that we all pray. It's so important then that we come together in what unites us than focusing on what divides us. When we're talking about governments, offices, but they are members of our churches. You know, they are Catholics, they are Protestants, they are, Muslims, they are members of our churches. So really, we need to look at ourselves. We need to look at ourselves in our mirrors. Is how do we behave in front of these people? Are we divided when they come to us? Or when they come to us, they find that we are one? So, because if we are not one, then we're giving them opportunity to divide us. For instance, let me talk about what happened in Kenya. Is most of the time is when we approach the election that we'll see government officers drawing themselves closer to churches. They want to have, it's like sometimes churches are transformed to campaigns because they'll come to church and then they will start delivering their messages in our churches. It's so important for us to, really what I'm trying to say is when we are one, we stand for common, interest, we can, of course, stand in front of what we know to not be true, what we know and think needs to change. And it's so important. That's what I think. We need to have a very strong interfaith, structures or faith-based organizations that work together, that have a clear vision of what they want to achieve, instead of being easily divided because of personal interest. And that's what is really causing what we are seeing now in most of our countries. But as I said, as disciples of Jesus Christ, or no matter what our beliefs are, we can be one and work together. And when we leave this place, I think this forum gives us the opportunity to reach out to each other, talk together, share experiences that will help us to move forward together. Thank you.
Thank you. In Uganda, we have an organization called the Interreligious Council of Uganda. It is comprised of all religious groups. Their leaders have that council, and recently the Directorate of Ethics Integrity had a second validation meeting for the policy, and the Interreligious Council issued a notice or a statement that they were pulling out of that meeting for reasons that they did not believe in the policy anymore, and they had not been consulted in the development of the policy. And guess what? The meeting didn't happen because the Interreligious Council pulled out. And as he said, if we have such associations, instead of being divided, coming together, because for such small organization to pull out and then the entire government pulls out in a meeting that has been organized, it shows how much strength we have together than separately. And looking at the charter, I believe rightly that it is okay to regulate conduct, not faith and the practice of the same. Regulate the conduct. We have no problem with it. Call for accountability, you shall be accountable. The church I go to, it was the very first church I saw in Uganda that does auditing of its books of account. I was like, this is rare. It was a very rare practice. We are not running away from that accountability, conduct being regulated, but the element of faith, practice of that faith, the right to freedom of belief and religion is a right of conscience. And once it's restricted, your conscience is violated. It's like torture. You cannot be tortured. It's an absolute right. So we are saying let our conscience and the practice of that conscience, because it also includes the element of you not having a belief. It should be left and the conduct regulated. That's okay with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to pick up on something, Prof, you said. Our constitutional court in South Africa has ruled in a judgment that even if a belief is bizarre, irrational, illogical, incapable of any scientific proof, it is still protected by the right to religious freedom. And one of the big dangers and one of the ways that the state tends to speak when it goes out with a view to bringing around a system of state control of religion is it goes to certain faith sectors and it says to them, aren't you concerned by some of the weird beliefs that are happening, by the strange things that are going on in the Christian church? Aren't you worried that that's going to somehow bring your faith into disrepute? And of course, many pastors are thinking, yes, that's right. Wouldn't you like us to help you? Shouldn't we have some orthodox belief that every Christian should now subscribe to, and let's have maybe a 3-year degree that every pastor should actually take before they're allowed to practice their religion. Well, of course, that might sound good, but that is absolutely not religious freedom. You only have to look at even the Bible, where the disciples of Jesus were considered to be unlearned men, ignorant men. Why? Because they hadn't done the official training of the day. But they were nevertheless entrusted by the Lord himself with the gospel message. So religious orthodoxy, any form of imposition of religious orthodoxy, no matter how it takes, whatever form it takes, is a very serious threat. Because as soon as the state puts its power and its backing behind any particular orthodoxy of faith or belief, it ends horribly for someone. And if you only have to look back in history at the context in the European nations during the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, there were the bloodiest wars of human history because different faith groupings had states backing them and they fought each other literally to the death. Some millions of people died in that. And that is one of the reasons why we have the right to religious freedom so well protected in our law. And that's why we must keep it well protected in our law. It's not enough that we just have to have some form of forced orthodoxy. The other thing I'd like to say is this. Another reason which they give sometimes as to why we need state regulation of religion is, and it was the title of the report of the CRL, the commercialization, the financial abuse. People are giving too much. People shouldn't be giving that amount. They're being deceived by religious leaders. Well, you have to ask the question, where does faith end and people's human gullibility begin? And should the state be the one that decides where that line is? And just again, a Bible example. There was one day when Jesus was in the temple looking at people throwing their money into the offering basket. And a woman, an old widow, threw what Jesus said amounted to her entire livelihood. Everything she had, she threw into the offering. And he didn't say, wait, this is commercial abuse. He commended her for her faith. How do you know when somebody's giving something by faith, even if it's substantial, and when they're not? So for the state to then decide what is or is not the right line or the right amount or the right quantum, and to be concerned about people's gullibility, I don't think that's their place. And if it was their place, then I think the first thing they should do is to shut down state lotteries and shut down casinos, because that's where a lot of poor people sadly do give their hard-earned income. So thank you.
I'm just going to, I think a lot have been covered. What is the way forward? I think for me, as religious people, we need to revive the Interfaith Council of South Africa in a big way, so that it can do what Michael is talking, it can do what other people are talking, so that we are all in the same page. It can cover Ubaba, which he said, how do we, when you go to government, so that we speak with that one big voice. And then number two is to take what was said and impress on the commission education, because everything is there. Everything is there. One of the beautiful things about South Africa, we have everything on paper. From the Constitution, Human Rights Commission, we have everything on paper. And if the commission can make its focus education across the board, I tell you, will protect those rights without even having to fight with one another. Thank you.
Giet, I can give you a confirmation. You don't have to go to school. Mark.
This has been a very invigorating panel and audience discussion as well. And can I just pull together a couple of the strings that have emerged? And it's something of a paradox. And the paradox is this, that freedom of religion has two strands to it. One is personal and one is associational. And in order for a religious institution to flourish, it needs legal personality. It needs to be able to have money, employ people, own land, and so on. And legal personality compels an engagement with the state. The state, most states, have a system of registration. That can be benign. It can be to afford religious organizations the freedom to flourish and to live their lives as they wish. But it can also be malicious. It can be controlling. And that is what needs to be guarded against, where government overreach is concerned. We lawyers have a wonderful expression. We call it the legal doctrine of non-justiciability. Matters of doctrine, matters of the internal regulation of religious bodies are not the concern of government. What that legal doctrine means is mind your own business. The government should keep out of the affairs of religious bodies. And we may disagree on what we believe, but every religious organization has autonomy, the right to regulate its own affairs, the right to control its own doctrines, and no court, no government department, no part of the state can intervene with that. And I want that to be the takeaway from this conversation. And would you indulge me in one further comment? I've received a personal message from Professor Cole Durham and made him aware that this panel has been dedicated to the work of Peter Kurtzen.
Yeah, we should send it to the...
Cole has been exceptionally moved by that and has asked me privately, but I do it publicly, to thank you, particularly Michael and Rassie, for making this panel a dedication to our dear friend, a pioneer of religious freedom in this great country, Peter Kurtzen.
Yes, I think thank you. It's really been incredibly robust dialogue. And I want to just touch on what Mulana Weiss was asking, the two questions there, is that, yes, the government might not take the religious communities very serious at the moment, but I think with the unity that has been growing in the last couple of years, the religious voice has been amplified through coming together, collaborations, coalitions, and I do believe there is definitely political pressure that is felt, whether it is through communication or whether it is through elections, that we can make our voice heard. I do think that we are getting to a place where, as Elder said, that what puts us together in unity is much more important than which separates us, so that we get to that place. And I would also ask the question again, maybe Mulana Weiss, how from this panel then, which we had incredibly great examples and solutions, how do we take this to the G20 in November? That would be a great takeaway from this.
Thank you very much. Well, maybe the only privilege of a moderator is that I have the last word, and I'll be very short. First of all, when you spoke about that woman with Jesus, it brought to mind, it's not the same story, but I thought of the building of the Mishkan, which is the temporary temple in the desert, where the children of Israel were ordered, each one to bring half a shekel. And the Bible makes it clear. The rich one should not bring a penny more, and the poor one not a penny less. And the idea is we all have the same share in God and in the Bible. The second thing is that we have freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of thought. It's undisputable in a democracy. Nevertheless, why do we have freedom of religion or belief? It's something beyond that. It means that it's much more than just freedom of speech and freedom. Which brings me to that, without any doubt, I'm the elder here by age. And as such, I attended the Oslo conference over 3 decades ago. I think we came up with the idea of the FoRB, freedom of religion or belief. I never understood the word or, and I don't understand it still. It sounds like either or. Why is it freedom of religion and belief? And the final word is, there is an advantage of the government cracking down on religion because it brings us closer together. We all feel intimidated so the government doesn't know. They reach an opposite result than they wished. Well, if it's my choice, I never choose to moderate a panel before lunch, but let me tell you, it's much worse to moderate a panel after lunch. So, thank you very much. Thank you, my colleague. I'm in the field for many years, but I've learned a lot from each and every one of you and from the audience. And see you in the next, we say next year in Jerusalem, but at least next.
Please come and take yourself a copy of the, there you go.
Yeah, we just get a picture. We have a group photo now. Don't take the original. So